All right, it's a couple of minutes after 9, so we're going to go ahead and get started with the cost estimating workshop this morning. Good morning. My name is Alex Price, and I am the Salem District Location and Design Engineer. We certainly appreciate the large turnout we had this morning for our workshop. It does appear we have got a great mix of folks representing our localities, consultants, as well as representatives from our district. Developing accurate and reliable cost estimates has always been important to us as an organization. However, during the last several months, there's been a significant amount of time and resources placed on this subject to find opportunities where we can improve. So I hope today's presentation will bring to light why this has been so important to us and what VDOT is doing to help improve this side of our business so we can all be successful in this endeavor. A few weeks ago, our district held our locally administered program day. A lot of you participated, and we were certainly happy to see the numbers of people who were able to attend. During this program, I gave a short presentation on cost estimating. This presentation covered a few topics within our allowable time frame. However, we weren't able to spend much time discussing the required tools or documents which are currently being required for each funding application we receive and for each project that is currently in the 6-year plan in any great detail. So this morning, for the sake of everyone on the call, I'm going to review some of the information that was presented during the LAP day, but we'll also review in greater detail some of the tools that we're using and considerations we're making when we are developing and reviewing cost estimates. We're also going to have some of our L&D staff discuss some examples of projects or funding applications that we've developed or reviewed recently. These examples will cover different areas we feel are most important when developing project cost estimates using real-world examples. This discussion will include areas such as development of the project scope of work, project sketch, cost estimates, as well as information required in the cost estimate workbook. So in summary, we'll have 5 separate presentations for you this morning, and we'll have a break in between the second and third presentation, or the second and third example. All right, before we get started with the agenda, let me go over a few housekeeping items. We want to provide plenty of opportunities for collaboration this morning during our workshop. So if you have questions during the presentations, please feel free to use the tools shown above to raise your hand, and we'll call on you in an appropriate time frame. Also, please use the comment question feature to type in your questions as well. Again, we'll have opportunities during or right after each presentation to address your questions. Let's keep all of our mics muted while our presentations are being given. And once we get to your question, we'll ask you to unmute yourselves for those who have raised their hand to ask your questions. All right, so I don't mean to be redundant with the first part of our presentation, but I do want to review some of the key information that was shared during the LAP Day presentation. I'll first discuss some of the expectations for developing accurate and reliable cost estimates. Next, I'll cover the steps VDOT has taken to improve cost estimating statewide. We'll also discuss steps that need to be followed prior to developing our cost estimates, considerations we need to make when developing our cost estimates, and the tools we're using to help ourselves and localities improve the cost estimating process. And finally, I've asked again some others in our section to help provide some real-world examples of some applications or projects that they've worked with that will hopefully show some areas where we've really hit the mark on developing cost estimates and also where we may need to improve. Hopefully these examples will give everyone an idea of what we're looking for and assist with developing documentation for your projects and funding applications. So, reliable and accurate cost estimates at every stage of the project lifecycle are crucial to VDOT's overall mission. Over the last couple of years, there's been a tremendous effort by the department to provide measures to ensure we have reliable and accurate cost estimates for every project that gets approved in the 6-year plan. Accurate cost estimates are important for instilling and maintaining trust when delivering our program, not only with decision makers, but also with the public. Keep in mind, everyone has access to project schedules and budgets using dashboard and can monitor how well we perform in delivering projects on time and on budget. Establishing a realistic budget during the development of a project application is critical because this estimate becomes the budget throughout the life of the project. More and more emphasis has been placed on developing reliable and accurate estimates up front, as we are expected to deliver all projects within the budget set at the time of the application. When estimated project costs deviate from what was budgeted, it can result in a reduction of the project scope, a delay in the project schedule, or could lead to the project being canceled. Given these expectations, we all need to be more deliberate with our estimates to get a handle on how much projects will truly cost. So what is VDOT doing to make more reliable and accurate cost estimating a priority? We took an internal look at our current estimating practices, processes, and performance. In 2020, we hired Ernst & Young, a multinational consulting firm, to perform an estimation and bidding study. Ernst & Young took a good look at our tools and practices for cost estimating and evaluated bids over a 5-year period. They also interviewed people responsible for project development and delivery, both internal and external to VDOT across the state. This study confirmed on a program level, VDOT overall was doing a good job with cost estimating. However, the study did identify some room for improvement that could lead to better cost estimates. Key recommendations from the study were presented to the Commonwealth Transportation Board in the fall of 2020. 2 of these recommendations have been implemented, with 2 still being developed. First, VDOT established a cost estimating office. This office opened in January of 2021. Next was to consolidate our existing cost estimating practices along with some new guidance in a cost estimating manual. This manual has recently been completed. Third is to develop and implement a cost estimating program, training program. And fourth is to create an estimating technology roadmap. So based on the recommendations from the study, VDOT has implemented a statewide cost estimation office. It's been up and running since January of 2021 and is managed by Mitch Ball. The mission of this office is to equip and enable VDOT personnel and business partners with leading cost estimating practices, philosophies, approaches, and tools. This office will also be responsible for developing and implementing statewide policy to ensure accuracy and consistency in our cost estimating. To help VDOT, localities, and our transportation industry, this office has been creating the new cost estimating manual and launching a new training program. So the first version of the cost estimating manual was completed on August 2nd, 2021. It is predominantly a compilation of existing VDOT estimating policy, guidance, and tools from various sources, combined with new guidance on specific aspects of VDOT estimating. The manual is intended to be a resource for everyone involved in the cost estimating process. This includes VDOT project development and construction staff, localities, and our consultants. One of the manual's strengths is that it includes resources for engineers and other technical professionals, as well as those who are new to cost estimating. It's been published and is in an electronic format to include appropriate hyperlinks. The manual was created with extensive input from VDOT staff and industry partners. Working groups that represent a good cross-section of professionals from across the state were assembled to revise the manual and ensure all aspects of the cost estimating process are covered. The manual is a living document, and its cost estimating techniques, processes, tools, and systems are constantly evolving. It will be periodically updated to reflect the changes. The latest version of the manual is available on VDOT's website. So at this time, I want to bring up our website and just kind of path through where this manual is located. And I think Adam's going to use the text feature and also post the link in the chat window. All right, I hope everybody can see the home screen. This is virginiadot.org. To get to our estimating manual, we would go to our business center and scroll down to where you would see manuals, training, and forms. At this location, you've got the link to the manuals, guides, and instructional, or I&I memorandum. So click that button, and you've got a whole list of manuals that you can view and use. And if you'll go to the construction estimation office, here's a link to the VDOT cost estimating manual. All right, and there it is. All, 167 pages. So hopefully that manual is brand new, and certainly want you all to use it as well as us. We're still reviewing some of the new aspects of what's in the manual, and we'll currently be using its policies and guidance moving forward. All right, I'm going to switch back over to the next slide. All right, I also want to make you aware of another guide to help with cost estimating. The right-of-way cost estimate guide has been developed to provide a greater depth and direction when preparing right-of-way estimates. This guide does not replace policy as specified in the right-of-way and utilities manual, but serves as a resource to assist an estimator with evaluating and solving common issues that may surface in preparing right-of-way estimates. Version 3 is the latest and was made available in June and can be found on VDOT's website. So the same link that Adam provided earlier is the same link that we would use to get to this manual. It's on the same link, and it's just down below under right-of-way and utilities. This is the location for the right-of-way manual. All right. So next, I'd like to take a closer look at some of the specific steps that can help with developing a realistic and accurate cost estimating or cost estimate, and therefore a more competitive application that leads to a successful project. First, we need to clearly identify the problem that a project will address. Without specifically focusing on what we're trying to solve up front, we run the risk of not identifying the most effective solution. This will inflate scope and cost and will lead to a non-competitive or non-viable project. You'd be surprised at the number of times we receive applications that don't actually address the real problem that is trying to be solved. Next, you have to propose and analyze potential solutions. It's important to identify the right size solution and avoid including project features that do not add value or address the specific problem. Including extra features or work items that do not solve the specific problem will inflate the project scope and cost. Finally, you should determine the appropriate scope of work. It's extremely important to identify and document all the decisions and assumptions that need to be considered when developing the full scope of work for your project cost estimate and application. For example, we sometimes see applications for projects that were submitted without considering key items like the required right-of-way, adequate site distance, or necessary stormwater management. We also have seen applications that did not take into consideration the appropriate level of traffic control during construction, how ADA compliance will be met, or the extent of our utility impacts. All right, so as part of the application process for all funding types, we must submit project sketches, estimates, and an estimate workbook. These items should be included as part of your application. VDOT will use this detailed project information to validate your application. A detailed project sketch should include as much information as possible, such as typical sections. For example, identifying new pavement versus milling and overlays or pavement wedging, and dimensions of travel lanes and shoulders, drainage and utility design concepts, and appropriate bike and pedestrian accommodations. Details about proposed signals, signage, lighting, retaining walls, and pavement should also be included. This sketch, with a clear understanding of the scope of work, should be developed prior to starting the cost estimate. Project cost estimates should be developed and reflect all items in the project description and sketch. We ask that you use a line item estimating method with the understanding this level of detail may not be known at the time of submittal for all applications. Line item estimates will allow us to better understand how you developed your estimate. The cost estimate should be as realistic as possible and account for known items and quantities, as well as those quantities that will be determined later during the development of the project. We would expect a few items or quantities to be grouped together using lump sum pricing, but documentation and justification for how the cost is developed needs to be included. Once the cost estimate has been developed, it needs to be transferred to a cost estimate workbook. This workbook is a spreadsheet that can be downloaded from VDOT's website to assist in generating cost estimates for all funding applications and for refining the cost estimate on funded projects throughout the development process. This tool is used to assemble the PE, right-of-way, and construction estimates, document project decisions or assumptions, and apply risk-based contingencies. A final project cost estimate is generated once the base estimates, applicable contingencies, incentives, and miscellaneous project costs are entered in the workbook. So next, I want to present some information on the last three items we discussed: project sketches, cost estimates, and the cost estimate workbook. This example of a project sketch for a is an example of a project sketch for a recently funded Smart Scale application in Bedford County. The sketch clearly demonstrates the scope of work for the project. The features of the design are clearly shown on the drawing and depicted in the legend. These include where we have full depth pavement, proposed milling and overlay, and removal of existing pavement. It also includes areas of proposed concrete islands, as opposed to leaving these medians as a grass median, or where we're using curb and gutter in the median. It has proposed drainage concept, included locations of a proposed basin for stormwater management, and all locations are shown for proposed right-of-way and permanent and temporary easements. Dimensions are shown on the proposed turn lanes, and let me just make a comment there. I mean, these need to be, we need to make sure all dimension aspects of our design are documented and justified, especially when these vary from what our standard requirements are for in this case, turn lanes, for left and right turn lanes. We need to understand what design vehicle was used for the design. So usually accomplished using auto turn sketches, and those sketches would be part of your submittal as well. A lot of times when we're constructing curb and gutter, we may need to saw cut into existing through lane pavement, maybe 1 to 2 feet, in order to form the concrete items. So this requires replacing the full depth pavement and likely milling and overlay. This requires a replacing of the full depth pavement and likely milling and overlay to overlap the saw cut joint or cross the entire lane. So this is something that sometimes gets missed. It appears this sketch doesn't show the proposed work. So I believe it's actually on a different sketch somewhere else. The typical section would be helpful with this type of documentation, which all may be included again on a separate sketch. All right, next I'm going to talk about details of cost estimates. I'm going to pull up our project estimating tools and provide you, I think Adam can provide you the link for those. I'm going to go back to our home page, I'm going to go to the business center. Down below, you'll see the different divisions, and this is our central office division, our location and design division. We would path to the information that you can use, learn more. And in this location, we have a link to our project estimating tools. So at this link, we've got different types of estimating tools that others have used across the state. We and others have used. There's a Bristol District L&D scoping estimating tool. Culpeper has developed one. Here's a link to our estimate workbook that, again, every project has to use or has to have. There's also estimating training modules. Those modules are available for understanding the use of the estimate workbook. I think the Bristol estimating tool, the Stanton estimating spreadsheet tool as well. So those are some valuable areas or training that you can use to help understand how to use these tools. This is the Stanton estimating spreadsheet tool. This is the estimate that we majority of the time are using for our quantity bid-based estimates. And here's also a link for the estimating spreadsheet instructions. All right, so I'm not going to go into detail on how to use each of those tools this morning, but as I mentioned, there are training videos that you can view to help navigate through them. Currently, the cost estimating office is actively reviewing our current estimating tools, and also that includes the development of a more robust, reliable planning level estimating tool. You know, although the planning level estimating tools can be successful or can be used successfully today, we have recently started to gravitate toward using more of a quantity bid-based estimate in our district. In this case, the Stanton estimating spreadsheet tool is being used. For the Stanton estimating spreadsheet tool, the project actually estimates a spreadsheet, or the project spreadsheet uses regression-based statistical models as well as geographically based models to generate quantity-based estimates for VDOT administered projects. It takes bids on a 3-month running average from across the state. But one thing to remember, it doesn't include lump sum items. So for these items, these costs need to be developed using a different method. Sometimes that's using representative projects, comparable projects, or engineering judgment. As far as average representative bids, when developing your quantity bid-based estimates, we feel the most accurate way to develop bid prices are using similar representative projects that have been advertised in the recent past. We try to use a time period between 3 to 6 months to start with. If you don't find products that you can use, you may need to search for a little further out or into other districts to find more comparable projects. Keep in mind, you can't take the bid prices straight from the cost estimate with the lowest bid. This will only give you prices that are most likely lower than all the other bids. We would use an average of an acceptable range of prices. Don't want to be using bids that are way off the mark, either way high or way low, which will skew the average of your bids. Also, when looking at unit prices for representative projects, make sure you keep in mind the quantities that are being used. If you have a higher quantity for a bid item than a comparable project, naturally you would expect to pay a lower price versus, a bid item with a lower quantity. So just be careful about that. A lot of times we find people using the prices right from the representative project, and one thing we find is, as soon as your quantities are different, you're going to see different prices. Next, let's discuss some things we've seen that will impact our bid prices, which we've seen with some of our projects. Urban versus rural. Keep in mind where your project is located. In more urban areas, in general, we're going to see a higher traffic volume. So there's likely going to be more restrictions on the available work hours. Work areas are going to be more confined, so production rates may be a little lower. You may see need for multiple construction phases to keep multiple lanes of traffic open, given the higher traffic volumes. So we need to think about that when we're thinking about the initial estimate. How is this job going to be constructed? And certainly, how does the volume of traffic and where the project's located, how does that work into those assumptions we're making when we're looking at the cost of those items? We'll also likely see a greater number of utilities on a project. So, with the presence of more utilities, it's going to require additional coordination between multiple utility contractors and your prime. So these are just a few items that may impact your prices when estimating the cost of a job in an urban environment. We've talked about the MOT above, but for more complex, or the more complex your MOT and construction phases are that you introduce your project, the more expensive your project's going to be. So let's try to make every effort to give the contractor as few restrictions working on the project as possible. For example, sometimes we'll restrict the contractor from working on both sides of a four-lane facility when your peak hour traffic is significantly different depending on what part of the day it is. So only restrict the contractor from working in an area if it's absolutely necessary. Consider closing lanes during the day, even if it's if it's not the most popular decision. Use alternate routes or detours when feasible to open the area up for construction and for the contractor. Night work, I think we all understand that limiting night work is what we need to do if at all possible. I think it goes without saying, night work is certainly not only less safe, but production rates drop off significantly when you require the contractor to do work at night. The items we just discussed are ones that we normally start thinking about after we've scoped the project and we're finalizing the contractor's sequence of construction and MOT plan. But these items need to be considered when we're putting these initial estimates together. We really need to think about, again, a lot of the details, and a lot of those details that affect the price of a project is how it's going to be built, the MOT, if there's going to be night work, any type of restriction that you're requiring the contractor to follow is going to have an impact on the price of your project. All right, let's discuss some things that we've seen that will impact total cost of our projects. Sometimes we've seen projects where the assumptions have been made that no right-of-way will be required for a project. And, I know these projects are out there, but I've never worked on one, or there have been very few. So if we assume we don't have a need for right-of-way or easements, we need to be 110% sure. There's most always is a need for at least an easement. And we've made this mistake before, and these costs can certainly blow a budget really quick. So just keep in mind when you're making those assumptions, we need to be confident in the assumptions that we're making. Utility impacts. We've talked about the utility impacts or the cost of those impacts. Certainly, we should always try to eliminate the impacts which only present themselves during construction. Do your homework. Get the appropriate level of SU surveys, subsurface underground engineering surveys, or subsurface utility engineering surveys performed during the PE phase. This will allow you to eliminate the impacts as much as possible, or at least minimize them early on before your project goes to construction. Condition of existing assets. So if you've got questions about the conditions of some of your existing assets, such as your pavement or storm sewer systems, make sure you're looking at these early on and include them in your estimate. A lot of times we found ourselves making significant improvements to these types of items when the cost of these improvements were never initially considered. Recently, we've had to take a stance that if an item wasn't in the original scope of work, we're not adding it during the design. And again, these are areas that can really bite us. And if we know that there's assets that we want to improve as part of a project, even though it's going to cost and may cause your project to not be as competitive, we need to make sure we include it in the initial estimate. Environmental impacts, certainly need to identify potential impacts early on so you can mitigate these issues, eliminating or minimizing the impact. If you can't eliminate or minimize them, at least you can correctly estimate the cost of the impact. This may be in the form of payments for stream credits, payments to a wetland mitigation bank, cost of natural stream design, which is expensive, and may take on the additional cost of the required right-of-way needed to relocate a stream. Here's a last one, types of work to prime and profit margin. So consider what type of work you're putting out for bid and how much work you're making available for a prime contractor to make a profit. You know, when the market is booming and contractors have options to choose the work they bid on, and we need to try to make sure our products are attractive for contractors to bid on, or we need to realize that it's not as attractive and, you know, realize the cost of this job may increase because of there's other products out there the prime may want to be more competitive and try to win. You know, hopefully this will increase the number of contractors bidding on your work and in turn increase competition. Again, if we can't do this, expect the prices to be higher than expected. All right, now I want to spend a little bit of time talking or taking a closer look at an example of a cost estimating workbook. As previously stated, this tool is used to assemble the PE, right-of-way, and construction-based estimates. It also allows for grouping of similar items such that risk-based contingencies can be applied appropriately. A very important part of the development of the workbook is documenting the assumptions made for the base bid and contingencies used for each discipline of work. This needs to be included so reviewers can have this information when reviewing your estimate. The final project cost estimate is generated once the base estimate, applicable contingencies, incentives, and miscellaneous construction costs are entered into the workbook. All right, in the workbook, there's a separate sheet that provides acceptable percentages of contingencies that need to be applied to each discipline of each phase of the project cost estimate. And these contingencies are a function of the risk and level of project development and should be applied as demonstrated above. The level of development for new project applications are expected to be within the 0 to 10% range. So on the far left, you'll see the pre-scoping documents prior to project selection. This is the area that we need to be looking at when we're evaluating the contingencies that we need to be using for our project. Typically, for new applications, again, we'll need to use contingencies for most of our disciplines in the construction phase in the 40% range. In some cases, we've actually seen these percentages higher, which was directly tied to the lack of development of the project and the level of understanding of the scope of work during our reviews. So this is why it's so important for our reviewers to really be able to clearly understand the scope of work and assumptions made when developing the base cost estimates and deciding upon the appropriate contingencies. So now we're going to talk a little bit more detail about specifics of entering information into the PE estimate portion of the workbook. So you can pick the source. Let me get my cursor over here. You can pick the source of your justification for your PE estimates. There's a drop-down box on each of these phases, the PE, right-of-way, and construction phases, that you can pick different types of sources that you use to generate your cost estimates from. Based on the level of development and complexity of the project, we typically are using contingencies for our PE estimates of around 15%. Also, there's additional items that we need to make sure that we are considering when developing the PE estimate. Items such as the payment for nutrient credits, need for review of the floodplain impacts and or revisions, needs for river mechanic modeling, work to complete complex MOT plans, and the SUE surveys we spoke of earlier, trying to identify those utilities up front. The SUE surveys are expensive, but in the long run, I think it's necessary, and it's very helpful to have them, but we need to make sure that we've identified the cost of those. Extensive geotech borings, mitigation credits for stream and wetland impacts. All this has to be paid for within the PE phase. So the mitigation credits, the nutrient credits, again, those aren't something that comes out of the construction budget. That comes out of our PE phase cost estimate. I think the best way to estimate a PE budget would be to use previous costs for similar type projects. Sometimes using percentages of construction budgets can be used as a check in a lot of cases. We'll see ranges from 12 to 15% in these cases, but we don't necessarily want to see the prime way or the only way you're estimating your PE budget is by using a percentage of your construction budget. So as far as right-of-way estimates, we're usually not developing these and leave these to the experts in our right-of-way division to provide these numbers for us. The main thing I want to focus on is making sure we account for these impacts, not only in our sketch, but also in our cost estimate. We also need to ensure we've identified all of our out-of-plan utilities, power, gas, cable, any type of work that's not going to be part of an in-plan utility item that's going to be, again, a part of our construction set needs to be included in these costs. Now, I know when we've developed right-of-way estimates in the past, the costs have certainly raised eyebrows. The amounts have seemed to be exceedingly high. Unfortunately, a lot of our costs associated with right-of-way acquisitions have to account for the likelihood of condemnations, which can be very expensive. And, routinely we receive FOIA requests straight from lawyers requesting information about the property owners that we're impacting. And unfortunately, this has resulted in a lot of property owners retaining lawyers for their services, which has resulted in the filing of significant number of condemnations. And unfortunately, we've experienced our fair share of these. And at the end of the day, this results in a higher right-of-way cost for our projects. I would encourage discussing the needs of right-of-way from your property owners very early. Maybe they'll be willing to donate required properties or selling property well before funding applications are submitted. And unfortunately, if the property has not been secured by the locality before the funding application is submitted, the cost has got to be included as part of the total project cost for your applications. All right, let's switch to details of filling out information for the construction phase of the workbook. Let me first discuss the items at the bottom of the figure because these are very important, often overlooked when developing construction estimate. And contingencies, as previously discussed, do not cover these items. So, therefore, the C&I cost, VDOT, and locality oversight, our incentives that we're applying to our contracts, utilization of locality or state forces, railroad flagging and coordination, and cost of claims and work orders need to be accounted for and populated in the rows listed in the workbook down in this area here. In the past, I do want to make this comment. In the past, for incidentals and work orders, we've used 5% for our tier 1 projects and 10% for our tier 2 projects. But we found that there's significant risk in exceeding 5% for our tier 1 projects, and therefore we're using 10% for all projects to cover the cost of incidentals and work orders. Now let me move to the top of the sheet, discuss populating costs for each discipline. In this area, the type of work to include in each discipline should be self-explanatory. These disciplines are essential and will contain items associated with similar work for a project. When entering costs for each discipline, we'd like to know the source, where the cost of the items came from. Again, there's drop-down boxes that you'll see that will give you some options to use, but we want to see what type of source was used to generate costs for your project. In the next column is where we would, I'm going to speak to the base costs for our disciplines in a second, but in the next column is where we would enter our contingencies for our discipline, for each discipline. The contingency should be taken from the sheet I spoke of earlier, and again, should be a function of the risk and level of project development. And usually that's 40% for the level of development and information that we know at the time when the estimate is initially being created. The snapshot doesn't have the heading, but to the far right is where we need to have documentation on the assumptions, which were made when calculating the base cost and developing contingencies used for the type of work being quantified. All right, moving back to the base costs column, we've used one of our estimating tools to help quantify and populate these costs. This example uses the Stanton District's estimating spreadsheet. And notice we've grouped items into separate disciplines as they are listed in the cost estimating workbook. And you'll see also we've color-coded items associated with each discipline and totaled them to the right of the estimate. So all of our pay items are to the left. Again, we've color-coded like items that are in disciplines that we're going to transfer back to our cost estimating workbook. All right, so now we're able to easily transfer these costs for each discipline to the cost estimate workbook in the appropriate location. Hope that's pretty clear for everyone. Just wanted to highlight that this cost estimate workbook shouldn't be used until we have that detailed estimate developed, and it's really just a matter of transferring information from your estimate back to your workbook and just categorizing those costs into different disciplines. All right, so this is the final cost estimate workbook for a project. I'm sorry it's not as visible, but it has the phases of each project. Up here in the top, you've got the PE phases, or the PE phase. In the middle, you've got the right-of-way phase. Down below, you've got the construction phase. And then beneath that, you've got the miscellaneous costs that are associated with constructing a job. This estimate workbook allows for contingencies to be used to help mitigate the risk associated with the level of design that's been completed and complexities of your project. It also provides areas used for documenting and justifying your base estimate and contingencies over in this area. The workbook also provides room to include the miscellaneous costs associated with construction. Again, as I mentioned earlier, such as CE&I, VDOT and locality oversight, incentives, utilization of locality or state forces, railroad flagging and coordination, and cost of claims and work orders. All right. I know that's a lot of information that I've gone over this morning. I don't guess we had anybody raise hands, and maybe we did, but we'll certainly take some comments and questions if we have them at this time.
Alex, there was one in the chat box that referenced the Stanton estimating tool, and the link goes to inside VDOT, so those without a VDOT account can't get to it. Is there a way for those outside of VDOT to use or have access to the Stanton estimating tool?
Okay, Mike, I thought that these are for those who are outside of VDOT to use. So we will check on that and make sure we get the answer to you. These tools certainly need to be available for all of our partners, including our localities and our consultants. So let me check on that, and I will follow back up with you. So I do apologize if you're getting an error using that at this time. Anybody have any questions? Again, I know that was a lot of information. I hope that was helpful. I think the next part of our presentation is going to be extremely helpful in just reviewing what we're looking at, the scope of work that we feel needs to be looked at or needs to be accounted for when developing your projects and estimates. So if there are no questions at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Dunn. Kelly is one of our assistants in our location and design section, and he's going to present our first project for this morning.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Give me a second to share my screen. Okay, so yeah, the project I'm going to go over is a revenue sharing pre-application that we received this year. Sort of start off with a project overview, kind of go over the cost estimate and development a little bit, and then wrap up with a summary. And so this particular project, it's approximately a 0.6 mile proposed vertical and horizontal realignment and widening of an existing suburban collector roadway. The project was submitted as a revenue sharing project pre-application this year, as I previously mentioned. So let's get right to it. We'll just look at one section of the proposed improvements to keep things more brief. There are multiple sheets submitted. I guess when I say sheets, I mean like sections of roadway submitted with the sketch, but just to keep things more on the brief side, we'll just focus on one of those preliminary plan sheets. So right now you should see a typical section pulled up. I think this is great. It really helps nail down, define a good portion of the scope. It's a great piece of the puzzle to help develop an accurate estimate from. Clearly defines the pavement structure. You can see down here, they've got surface mix, base aggregate, showing what the depths are that they're proposing to use. It shows proposed lane widths, 10 feet. Shows the use of standard CG6 curb and gutter is proposed here, there. Indicates guardrails planned in lieu of flatter slopes right here along the right-hand side. I'm not saying that I would agree with everything that's shown on the typical or recommend all aspects of the typical, but it clearly helps identify what the applicant has in mind in developing the estimate, and it helps us analyze that a little bit closer and provide feedback to the applicant. The next sheet is a existing conditions survey. And I think this is a combination probably of some aerial mapping that the locality has, combined probably with some GIS data that they have. And while it might not be, 100% accurate, it's certainly a good tool to work with. Having survey data, GIS data, aerial mapping such as VGen, Google, Bing imagery, it's just great for planning and helps the estimator make some educated guesses, which helps with the developing an accurate estimate. Google Earth, Google Maps, Bing Maps, Street View are very helpful as well and can help you get eyes in the field in many cases without actually going to the field. So let's take a quick look at, I'm pretty familiar with Google Earth or Google Maps, and I use it all the time. And to me, one of the great benefits of it is I can go out and look at the project in person. But then if I want to go back and look at it a little bit closer, back before Google Earth was around, I used to go out and take a couple hundred pictures and walk up and down the roadway, which is questionably probably not the safest thing in the world to do. But this allows you to get kind of like a high elevation view of it from a street view. And here we see a sewer manhole. We can see significant overhead utilities, 3-phase power, all kinds of whether it's telephone or cable TV up here, and spin around, rotate it around, you can see a street light down here, a couple connecting driveways, sort of like a paved drainage swell running down this side. I can click this guy, move forward a little bit, go forward a little bit more, spin around, here's a drainage structure. I can spin over here and kind of look at what is a floodplain area. It's an incredibly helpful tool. And like I said, it doesn't have to be Google. Bing can do the same things. And sometimes if you can't see it in Google, you could look at Bing and it can show you what you can't see in Google. So anyways, great tools to use. Of course, actual field located survey data is best, but it may be cost prohibitive at this stage of project development. In this instance, I would say it would be better to show all of these existing features on the conceptual layout, which is the next sheet of the sketch, which also shows the proposed improvements as well. It's nice to see, here's in the red is the overhead power, in the in the green is the sanitary sewer, in the blue is the water system. They've got 100-year floodplain limits shown right here, a floodway limit shown. Let's see, what else do they have? I think that, and then of course, they've got property lines, right of way, and all that stuff's great. But then you jump over here, sheet 3 of the sketch, and a lot of that's not shown. I don't see any utilities. The flood zone limits aren't shown. They still do have the right of way and the property lines shown, but anyways, having it all combined together where you can see how the proposed impacts the condition or the existing, that's really helpful. So let's see. So the concept plan is great though, and it's a necessity. Alex mentioned, the thing you want to really develop is your sketch, your concept plan, and you want to do it with some detail. On a conceptual level, it really helps identify the proposed improvements and limits of construction, while identifying anticipated impacts. You can see on here they got a fill line, limits of construction, so you get an idea of based upon that 2-to-1 slope that they showed us in the typical section where that's going to hit. And you get down in here and you can see that what's outlined in the darker blue lines is the existing Bowman Hollow Creek. And you can see the fill is going down to essentially cover up the whole creek. And so they're planning on relocating a good section of the stream. And that's kind of this lighter blue area down through here. It also shows right-of-way impacts like this right here, shows, the potential encroachment on a residence or a loss of structure. We call that a total take. So with all that said, let's take a deeper dive into the scope and estimate. To develop a good and accurate estimate, you need to get into the weeds a bit and keep Murphy's Law in mind. And when someone said Murphy's Law to me years ago, I was like, yeah, that's very true. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And, I'm sure many of us are familiar just with that happening in our lives. Sometimes you're just like, are you kidding me? And, you didn't really expect something to happen, and sure enough, it comes along and bites you. So it happens more often than not when too little time and effort is put forth in determining project impacts and cost. A detailed line item estimate was not provided with this revenue sharing pre-application, so it's somewhat impossible to tell what items have been thoroughly considered and what ones have not. So it makes it hard from our viewpoint to review this project from an estimate standpoint. But per the typical section, if you recall, the cut slope side of the roadway is calling for a 1-to-1 slope max. These are some things that kind of caught my eye when I started looking at this pre-application. And it's important to point out it is a pre-application, and so we don't expect it to be complete. We want to point out these things so the applicant takes a deeper dive into them. So yes, the slopes that are steeper than 2 to 1 are usually reserved for solid rock or engineered slopes. In considering a flatter slope than a 1 to 1, which may very well be necessary, the applicant may find the earthwork and right-of-way impact costs will increase significantly. So if you look at here along, this is the uphill side here on the top of the screen, and this is the downhill side. And so, this is essentially a hillside coming down towards the road. You can see they've got it all shown in here in fill, and that gets us to the profile. And if we look at the profile, they've got the road running all the way up through here, shown in fill. And you can see the baseline from where that profile is cut is running somewhat within the limits of the existing roadway. Sometimes it skirts all the way out here to the outer right-hand edge, if you're driving from left to right. But it's going along the existing. Talk about that a little bit more. So yeah, in this case, it may be okay as shown, since the profile is shown in the roadway improvement, are mostly to be constructed by raising the proposed vertical alignment several feet above the existing roadway, which may eliminate the need for cut slopes on the uphill side, but doing so will most certainly require extended road closures, detours, the need to continue access to connected driveways and streets during construction, and a lot of flagger hours, all of which will drive up the PE traffic estimate from developing a MOT plan and the maintenance of traffic estimate as part of the construction estimate, or part of the maintenance of traffic actually implementing it during construction. In addition, if the horizontal alignment is shifted away from the creek's down here, if you shifted the horizontal alignment away from the creek to avoid the creek impacts, that uphill slope will definitely come back into play, because you're going to have to cut into it more, and it's going to be harder to connect these driveways up in this area. Your chances are the existing right-of-way, you're going to need proposed right-of-way on that side of the road. So with all that said, this is a high-risk cost and should be investigated further to determine a feasible solution and accurate cost to implement this solution. Also, based upon the sketch, right-of-way impacts will be significant, with the possibility that a total take, I mentioned that earlier, will be needed. But the estimate workbook itself indicates a right-of-way cost to the project of 0. And so we'll kind of jump over to the estimate workbook real quick, and then I'll jump back. But here's your right-of-way acquisition, and it's blank all the way across there. So that's something the applicant needs to take a little bit closer look at. But this is a pretty significant right-of-way purchase. From here to there. Trying to from here to there. It's the time you add that up for all the parcels throughout all the sheets this project makes up, that cost is going to be fairly high. Per the sketch, stream and floodplain impacts look significant. We kind of touched on that a little bit previously. This is often problematic. It's expensive from an environmental permitting, geotechnical, and floodplain standpoint. The PE estimate only shows $39,000 for environmental studies, permitting, etc. Due to the level of stream impacts alone, I would suggest investigating this cost more. From a geotechnical viewpoint, floodplains are usually full of organic material, which is not a great material on which to place structural fill upon, and thus extensive geotechnical studies may be needed, along with the need to mitigate unsuitable soils via undercuts and embankment stabilization. PE geotechnical estimate only shows $29,000. Once again, this would be another cost that I believe needs a closer look. From a floodplain standpoint, placement of fill in a floodplain can be a showstopper, and the studies to prove that its impacts are okay are costly. The applicant does have a $120,000 PE hydraulic estimate, but due to the level of impact shown, the need for studies, stream relocation designs, stormwater system designs, including stormwater management, nutrient credit purchases, etc., I would suggest taking a look at this estimate a little bit closer also. The applicant may want to consider some other design options to avoid the stream impacts, such as reinforced soil slopes, which can allow you to place a slope, much steeper than 2 to 1 with soil, or consider retaining walls, which would be expensive, be a costly alternative in addition, or shifts in the alignment. But just some different thoughts on how to. You heard the saying, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and sometimes the other way might be a cheaper way to do it. There appears to be a lot of water, speaking utility-wise, sanitary sewer and overhead utilities within the construction limits. When you jump back here to sheet 2, and you think about, the roadway is kind of going to follow this dark bold line, which cuts across many of these utilities shown. While a lot of the project as shown is to be constructed in fill and may therefore be thought that these underground utilities will only be slightly impacted, the applicant should consider the depth, age, and condition of these underground utilities to determine if they will be able to maintain their integrity during compactive efforts of the placed fill. In addition, many of the overhead private utilities are shown immediately adjacent to the existing roadway. We can see that, going back to Google Earth here real quick. You see all these, and then that runs all the way. You can sit here, Google Earth, and jump up and down the road, and it's pretty slow, isn't it? But anyways, you can travel all the way up this roadway doing this, and these overhead utilities are running right up along the roadway, crisscrossing it throughout the project. Anyways, they are immediately adjacent to the existing roadway. Relocation of utilities can be very expensive, and we would suggest further investigation in the cost to relocate these utilities. In most situations, it would appear that $156,000, as shown in the estimate, would not be adequate to cover their relocation, if not falling within an existing franchise agreement with VDOT or the locality. The stormwater system shown on the sketch indicates the same number of inlets on both sides of the roadway. So let's take a look at that real quick. In every instance on here, there's a curb inlet shown here, and an outfall pipe to the creek. Curb inlet shown here, outfall to the creek. And so, however, the east side of the roadway, if you recall, is bordered by a hillside, and the west side is bordered by a fill slope. Due to this, significantly more runoff could be expected to fill the gutter along the east side of the roadway, because it's going to run down the hillside, it's going to come across the shoulder, and then it's going to pour into the gutter pan. Then occurs on the west side, because there's no sort of off-site flow really coming to the gutter pan. Anyways, that would require more inlets and associated piping to capture all that. And so what I'm getting at is, probably on this side of the roadway, you're going to have a lot more curb inlets, and you're going to have, they're just going to be flanked. They're going to be down this way every couple of 100 feet to capture all this runoff. On this side, something like what's shown might be adequate to pick up, the little bit of runoff that you're going to have in here. But I will say this, also the typical showed a 10-foot lane. And one thing that I learned years ago is, sometimes while a narrow lane might seem like it's going to save you on paving cost and that sort of stuff, one of the things you might run into is it's difficult to meet your spread calculation requirements because your lane is so narrow, and sometimes having a little bit wider lane, it has other benefits, but one of the other benefits too is you don't have to install so many curb inlets and so much stormwater system improvements to capture the water and keep the spread from spreading so far out into the lane, if that makes sense to you. Let's see, based upon the sketch and lack of detailed line item cost estimate, we were unable to determine if erosion and sediment control measures were included in the estimate. The limits of driveway connections don't appear to be considered in the estimate sketch, but should also be considered. And then another thing too is, a lot of people want lighting these days, and especially in suburban and urban areas, typically intersections are lit, but we were unable to tell whether lighting is included in the estimate. My guess is probably because we saw one in Google Earth at one of the intersections here a minute ago, we would probably want it on this project also. But without the detailed line item estimate, like I said, it's difficult to tell whether it's actually in there or not. So let's take a quick look at the workbook. Most of this stuff is stuff that Alex kind of went over already, or I kind of discussed there just a second ago. But this is the place to apply your contingencies. Don't apply them to your detailed cost estimates. Save them for your estimate workbook. As mentioned, the P estimate appears low considering the project length, the amount of stream impact shown, anticipated stormwater design, impacts to the 100-year flood zone, in-plan utility relocation design, box culvert design, materials, geotechnical investigations, size of the survey area, environmental permitting associated with stream impacts. And if the project's to be VDOT administered, VDOT can help with estimating this cost. And once the scope is well defined and the overall detailed construction estimate is refined. Like I mentioned earlier, the sketch indicates a fair bit of right-of-way will be required with the project. But if you look in the right-of-way estimate, there's no dollar figure for it. Out of plan utility relocation estimate appears low. That's those private utilities I was talking about, like the overhead power, cable TV, telephone, those types of things. And then you get down here to the construction portion of the estimate workbook. Like I said, without that detailed line item estimate, it's impossible to determine specifically which items were included. Based upon the provided sketch and anticipated impacts, it appears the construction costs listed are low, and more time and effort is needed to better determine these project costs. And that's that's an important thing to put out there. And I can remember, there's in my career, there's been pressure sometimes from a client or whatnot. It's almost like you put forward like what you think the estimate's going to be, and they push back and want you to lower that estimate, but it's an unrealistic lowering. So I would warn against that, and stand your ground. If you think it's going to cost more, I would be prepared to defend that. And it really in the long run, because sometimes your clients are a board or a council, and if you tell them it's going to cost $1 million, and 2 years later all of a sudden it's $3 million or $4 million, it really looks bad on whoever gave that low estimate. So this is the time to slow down a little bit and provide an accurate estimate to avoid those type of situations. So for instance, I think Alex talked about contingencies. Here they got 25% down across the board. Left as is, we would recommend increasing the contingencies per the provided guidance in the estimate workbook. And as a minimum, we would recommend 40%. But I would say on a project that has some questions to it like this one, you're going to want to go above 40%. Alex pointed out right here, incidental claims, you want that to be 10%. State forces, we usually reserve that for the cost of state proposed right-of-way. Contract requirements, incentives, disincentives, we can help you out with that, especially if it's going to be a VDOT administered project. And then down here, the CE&I cost. This is typically 20% of the total bid, non-bid items. So that'd be 20% of, here's this line right here, all the way across right there. So that number right there should be this one right here. And let's see, what else? I guess with that, I'll wrap it up. But in summary, I would say just think about Murphy's Law and those times when you're doing a home project, everyone can relate to that. And you make multiple trips to Lowe's or Home Depot to complete what appeared to you at first to be a simple task. And then you run there and you kind of oversimplify it and get what you initially thought. And then you get home and then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I need this. And you make another trip back. And speaking for someone who used to live in a rural environment, that trip used to be real time consuming. And, so keep that in mind and do your planning now up front. Slow down, take a deeper look at all the pieces that make up a project. That'll pay off when developing an accurate estimate. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Alex.
Yeah, Kelly, thank you very much. I don't see any comments on the content or questions that you had presented, but I did see one comment from Anthony. He's dropping off, but did want to remind everyone about the revenue sharing and TAP applications. And I hope this presentation or this workshop is timely. I know we've provided some initial comments for the initial applications. Final applications start on August 15th. The portal opens for those. So certainly we hope that some of the information that we're sharing today is taken into consideration when developing the final applications for those projects or for those types of revenue funding streams. Any questions? Kelly, I think you did a great job talking about a job that I think a client did some good work putting together what they felt was a very good application. But I think there are areas where you've highlighted that we feel that some more attention likely needs to be put on some of these areas. And I think you identified some of the areas that we're not always thinking about. The unsuitable materials, the floodplain analysis, the right-of-way is a big one that always seems like it comes up and pops its head up from time to time. And as I had mentioned, it certainly can bite us pretty hard when we're not estimating right-of-way impacts for these types of projects. Any other comments or questions for Kelly? I certainly want to make this as have as much collaboration as possible. I know there's a lot of information that we're presenting this morning, but please feel free to raise your hand, ask questions as we work through the rest of the presentations. All right, we're gonna touch on one more example, then we're going to take a 10-minute break. This next example is going to be presented by Eli Manning. Eli is a senior engineer in our section in L&D, and the project he's going to present, I won't steal his thunder, but it's a lower cost type project that we did where right-of-way was not included as an impact, and it certainly caused some heartburns as we were trying to get the job advertised. So Eli, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Let me share my screen. All right. I was the project manager on the Virginia Avenue Pedestrian Improvements Project. It was along Route 220 in Henry County near Collinsville. This is a relevant project because even though it was applied for by VDOT and VDOT administered, it's really a common type of project that you might see in the LAP world. It's a sidewalk project with pedestrian crossing. it's at the site of a pedestrian fatality, and so that was the need that the project was satisfying. There was no existing pet accommodations across the main line in this area, and so the application was made to remedy that. This was part of the 2018 round of smart scale applications. I've got a slide of the project sketch in the slideshow, but I'm going to bring this one over because I can zoom in a little better. The left to right main line is Route 220. This intersecting street is called Wheeler Avenue, near the Dutch Inn Plaza, near Collinsville, if you're familiar with the area. The proposed solution was to install sidewalk along the lower side of the road here. That's the west side, but plan bottom. There's existing sidewalk on the other side of the street, and the proposed improvements were to install curb ramps, crosswalk, and ped actuation and signals in this area. You can see that there are several entrances along the corridor here that were proposed to be replaced. These businesses, these buildings are sort of tight to the roadway. That'll come into play here in a minute, but you can just see that the proposed improvements were all along this block, proposed entrance upgrades. Until we get to the end here, this is called Printer's Lane, where the project would terminate. The sketch, you can see it doesn't show a buffer. The sidewalk was going to be placed right behind the curb, and that's something else that we'll consider here in a minute. So I'm going to go back to the slideshow. This cost estimate was developed using a tool called PCES. That's sort of a previous generation tool that VDOT and others use to develop estimates. It's sort of a coarser tool than what you've been shown so far today. The estimate workbook and the Stanton spreadsheet are more intentional about breaking out unit prices and organizing items into groups and showing subtotals and that sort of thing. PCS was more of a per foot of roadway or per foot of sidewalk type estimating tool that didn't require as much input. And so that could be fine if it fit your project or if you realize the limitations of the tool, but it could also create some problems if you weren't aware of that when you were using it. The total allocations for this project was about $639,000, $145,000 of which was for PE and $494,000 for construction. There was no right-of-way phase considered in the application, and the contingency was figured at about 25%. And so based on what we've seen so far today, that should raise a couple of red flags right away. It's something to at least investigate and look at a little closer. Why is the right-of-way phase $0 and why is the contingency 25%? Those ended up causing some problems on this project. So there were some scope issues because of the proximity of these businesses to the roadway and the amount of space that it takes to create a sidewalk. It was determined that several temporary construction easements would be needed. There was relatively little fee right-of-way required. The sidewalk mostly fits in the existing right-of-way, but it didn't offer enough room to actually construct the sidewalk. And so, as it turns out, 7 parcels were impacted that had to be negotiated. Easements had to be negotiated, and that activity needed to be incorporated into the project schedule. Overall, that process went pretty well. I think for 7 parcels, the sum that we ended up spending was pretty favorable. but you can't always count on that. You know, that's as Alex said, if you have to deal with a condemnation or some other problem, that cost can climb in a hurry. So we needed easements on this project. Also, there was some discussion about design standards and what would be required on this project. I'm going to go back to the sketch here and go back to this intersection where we were going to put the pet accommodations. As we started looking at this project with the traffic engineering group and other team members, we decided that this alignment of this crosswalk was not ideal. It's a little bit too far away from this intersecting street, and it was sort of thought that maybe that would have to be treated more as a mid-block crossing, which we didn't want. And so we had to go back and figure out what the best configuration of this crosswalk should be. And as we were doing that, we reviewed our own design standards, and in the road design manual, it says that whenever you alter one pet accommodation at an intersection, you have to accommodate all the other legs of that intersection as well, all the other segments. And so that meant that we would have to provide a crossing of this side street as well. So that added cost to the project. Back here. Yeah, so we needed to go through several design iterations to figure out exactly what this would look like. We went through the public hearing, the public involvement process, and got feedback. We got feedback from the business owners in the area. They all had a chance for input, and we got to an acceptable design that I think satisfied the project need and is still a viable project. We resolved the scope of these problems by not eventually replacing each intersection. We did install or design a 2-foot buffer between the curb and the sidewalk, and that got us behind the existing entrances to where we didn't have to touch any of them and not replace them. So there was some cost savings there. And it also worked out that the MOT budget for this project in the application was very conservative, and we were able to use some of the money that was budgeted for MOT and right away in PE phase. These are our total expenditures and the final construction estimate for the project. Due to the several iterations that we had to go through to get to the final design, we overran the PE by about $40,000. The right-of-way expenditures ended up being about $80,000. And then the final construction estimate is around $384,000. And you can see next to those figures the estimates from the application. This project was advertised back in May, and 2 bidders bid on the project. The low bid was about 50% over the construction budget, and we identified 3 main reasons that the bid was exceeded the budget. One, it's a small project with low quantities. It's 1,000 feet of sidewalk, about 6 curb ramps, 6 PED signals, and not much else. And so, this is common for an LAP type project. You've got these smaller projects, and often they're not really that attractive to the contractors. They are looking for bigger projects where they can get some economy of scale, and so it wasn't totally surprising that that's how it worked out on this project. Virginia Avenue is an urban arterial. It's the traffic volumes were sufficient, I guess, that that was an issue for constructability. Also, we advertised this project in May, and so probably the best that we could have hoped for was that the project would be awarded in July. And so that really just offered a short construction season from July till, say, the end of November. And we felt like that maybe was didn't benefit the bidding any. We re-advertised the project in July, and the bids will be opened at the end of August. But the major change that we made was that we incorporated the C7DD. It's a dual date special provision that allows the contractor to identify a window of time that they will construct the project. We set the final completion date for December of 2022 and identified the project duration for 120 days, but the contractor will be able to identify what 120-day window that they'll construct the project in between now and then. And so we already see that the plan holders list is longer than it was the first time for the first bidding. We have encouragement from central office that this is often a more successful bidding scenario. And so we're hopeful that the bids will be more favorable this time. Some lessons learned. Temporary construction easements will probably be needed even if it looks like that your project will fit entirely within existing right-of-way. Just as a rule of thumb or a starting point, from the back of the curb, you should assume 10 feet for right-of-way and then 10 more feet for the easement. So 20 feet total off the back of the curb for or your right-of-way needs for a sidewalk project. Of course, that can vary based on individual project conditions, but if you can't meet that off the bat, then you're probably going to need some funding in the right-of-way phase. We need to also make sure that we understand the relevant design standards during the application. As I said, the road design manual was fairly clear about what the accommodations around the intersection needed to look like, and that wasn't necessarily accounted for in the application. And so just make sure that you're aware of your design standards and account for them, or at least account for the risk as you develop the estimate. And then finally, the more contingency that you can apply up front, the lower the risk of incurring a project overrun on the back end of a project. The VDOT guidance of 40% for the construction phase contingency may seem like a big number, but that's insurance against having to make up a budget deficit on the back end of a project. That's all I had planned to share. Are there any questions about any of this?
Eli, this is Alex. Thanks for presenting, and I want to tell you how I really do appreciate you guys pulling this job together. I think we're going to get favorable bids for this project. But to the audience, this is a job that we had developed the scope and the cost estimate for. We made some mistakes that we were assuming. We had a design that would work without any modifications. And I'm going to say this is before Eli came on board. So, but don't want to throw him under the bus because it wasn't his project initially. But we all have opportunities to learn, and I like the list here that you've created, Eli. Certainly, temporary construction easements are something that we really need to consider when we're assuming that our project is going to be within existing right-of-way, understanding the design standards. And, when we talk about applying these contingencies, I want to ensure that every job, every application that we're applying contingencies to, we are doing it in a consistent manner. So I hope folks don't think that, you know, just because we're applying 40% contingency to your projects, it's going to create an uneven competition for our applications. We're trying to do our best to treat every project the same, and certainly, and I'm open to any conversations that we want to have based on, you know, the applications of contingencies. But again, we're trying to do it in a very consistent manner. The special provision that Eli spoke of earlier, you know, concerning giving the contractor, you know, the certain number of days to do the work, that's something that we found out most recently that we can use. I see that as a very valuable tool. You know, this type of work that we've advertised, this is filler work, probably for someone. You know, prime is when he's hungry, he's probably not going to be going after this work because there's, again, not a lot of profit that's involved with this project. Ironically, the contractor that had the lowest bid, if you want to say the lowest bid, with the first advertisement, actually had a project over in Carroll County that he was bidding on at the same time. So this would have been work that he would have tried to do, again, as filler work. But again, his prices were out of line and out of the, you know, the realm of our budget. So hopefully, as Eli mentioned, we've got several contractors that are looking into this project now that we've added the special provision, and we hope to see a successful outcome here coming up in the next bid letting. All right, it's 10:33. I don't see any other questions out there or comments, so we're going to take a small break. We're going to come back at 10:43. Give you time to get some more coffee, or maybe have a restroom break, or take a phone call here or there. But we'll come back at 10:43, and we'll have Adam Cisnowski up talking about one of his projects. Thanks very much. All right, it's 10:43, and we're going to start back with our workshop this morning. Mr. Chesnowski is presenting on one of his LAP products, I believe, Adam. And Adam is, he is one of our coordinators with all of our LAP jobs, and certainly appreciate his ability to join us this morning and talk about some of the lessons learned and in the job that he has managed. So Adam, with that, go ahead and take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, I wanted to pick a project that hit little different circumstances than some of the other ones, being locally administered, but also one that was broken out into a phase. We have that often in the LAP world where projects will be designed on a larger scale, and then the budget constraints necessitate splitting it up and then applying for funds for the next phase that was broken out later on. It has its advantages, but it also has some unique things to consider. And so this was this road, Plantation Road, bike ped streetscape phase 2. It was a project from an early SmartScout round. It was actually the second round. So that was back in 2016 that the application was done. And thought it'd be beneficial to take a hindsight look on how the application estimate compared with the final bid estimate and the construction contract award. And then look how the new estimating tools that we now have, and this new guidance can assist us in a similar type of project. And so we'll look at an overview that kind of how the project was developed and came to being, how the estimate was developed, looking at the results, the application of the estimate workbook and what changes that might have identified, and then some recommendations. So this particular project, Plantation Road between 81, exit 146, and Williamson Road, it's, as you can see, there's a lot of uses in there, a lot of activity.
Hey, Adam, I'm sorry, this is Alex. I'm not seeing your presentation. Just want to make sure that you are presenting and others can see it. If not, I may get off and get back on. And I'm not sure how that will affect the recording.
We cannot see it either.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
This thing has been very picky about presenting.
And it may be more safe for you. Here we go. Here we go.
Is it showing the presentation?
It is loading. It's not, I wouldn't say showing quite yet.
No, it's funny. It worked earlier and now it doesn't.
You want to try to get off, Adam, and get back on? Normally I would do the same, but I don't know how that's going to affect the recording of the presentation. Here we go. Here we go. You're on.
Oh.
You're on. Go ahead and put it in present mode.
All right. So we can all see the slide that says identifying a transportation need. So yes, this is, as I mentioned, it's Plantation Road between exit 146. Exit 146 and Williamson Road. It's a highly traveled corridor of mixed uses. No bicycle or ped facilities. It is basically a wide stretch of road, lots of lanes, high traffic. And of course, when you have restaurants and businesses, you're going to have a potential, that mix of pedestrian crossings and high-speed traffic is not good.
Adam, you're not in presentation mode. I just want to let you know you may have intended to be in. There you go. Okay.
Yeah, it is. It should be full screen.
It is full screen.
Yeah, it's sharing my whole screen, and it has the thing in presentation mode.
Yeah, it's in presentation mode now on my screen. Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, as you can see in the picture, this is how the roads were designed back when this facility was put in. Very wide, almost felt like an airport runway. Didn't consider bicycle and ped accommodations, and so that's one of the solutions, is to solve both the traffic speeds and provide alternate transportation options. And so the project was multiple projects to solve this. There was the phase 1 bike ped streetscape, and that's the green and yellow segments there to put in the multi-use trail along that corridor and narrow up some of the lanes. That was complete. Construction was completed a couple of years ago. Then there was the Lila Drive intersection improvements. That's the blue line that you can see in the picture. That was the signal and ped crossings at that intersection where the few main businesses are located. Construction was completed December 2020. That was a VDOT administered project. And then the red line is the phase 2. That's the project we're going to consider. That was the September 2016 round 2 application. So Alex mentioned earlier developing the right size solution and really sees completing this corridor of the bike ped components out to Gander Way. So it includes a 5-foot sidewalk in that block from Walren to Gander, as the multi-use trail transition at the Walren Drive crossing, pedestrian crossings at Gander Way, and then narrowing the vehicle lanes to reduce that high-speed feel, and also to use a little of that space for some of these facilities. So since the project was actually partially designed under phase 1, it had the advantage of being between 60 and 90% designed when it was removed from the phase 1 project. So that meant the termini were well identified, the major site features were already determined. So knowing the scope was actually pretty easy for this project. Well-defined quantities, recent bid information was used to determine unit prices at the time of the application. We looked at those. They looked pretty good compared to our bid tabs. In the estimate developed, they had a lot of components that we're looking for, and a good CEI amount was included. They did inflate in PCS back then. That is automatically done by Smart Portal now, based on the year of advertisements in the schedule. Now, so for contingency, they use 20%. Now, Alex mentioned that a lot of ones are 40%, but that's for a project that's at 0 to 10% development. We're between 60 and 90%. And so that's what VDOT calls the field inspection meeting level of development. And so when you have the suggested contingencies from the cost estimate workbook, remember this was not available at that time, so we wouldn't expect them to use that. But 20% is recommended for that level of development risk. And actually, we have to commend the estimator for actually not doing what we often saw back then, and that was just throw the standard 10% out, even for a project that was developed this far along. I was actually quite impressed with that when going back and looking at this. However, in looking at the suggested contingencies now, when we see field inspection meeting and 20% there for a higher risk, that's based on a normal project schedule timeline. So if you're at FI, you're probably within 1 year of advertisement. The problem here is that this particular application, we're 6 years from the planned project advertisement. So it's as if the project is stopping and getting paused for 6 years, and then it's going to pick back up. And so that time of advertisement would likely warrant an increase in contingency beyond what you see. So if you have projects that are broken out and they're at one of these various phases of development, you're probably looking at a higher contingency than what you see in these in the suggested contingencies tab of the estimate workbook. For the PE phase, again, it was based on to get the plans from 90% to completion, but remember that you're pausing in design as well. You push that add year out, you have a gap in the project. You don't know what's going to happen with changes to design concept standards, regulations. So there's certainly a recommendation to add contingency to the PE phase, and we'll see how the estimate workbook would identify that later on. It's good to note that they did include the stormwater quality regulation planning nutrient credit purchase. For the right-of-way phase, the county acquired the property, the actual easements and right-of-way needed for phase 2 during phase 1, and that was the best thing they could have done. That was a very smart move on the county's part. That removed a huge risk, and you know how property values increased between probably 2014 and it would have been done in 2019 timeframe. It would have cost a lot more. It would have taken a lot more time, and it would have added a lot more risk. So getting that out of the way, if you can do that and get that out of the way ahead of time, you are in a much better situation. So the phase 2 right-of-way phase was actually used for out-of-plan utility relocations only. And we see here, there's 30,000, and that was inflated by 12%, because the time gap between the estimate and the year it would actually occur would probably be about 5 years out, given the project schedule. But no contingency was applied here. We'll see the cost estimate work still recommends that 30 to 40% contingency for right-of-way phase, even at this level of development, if that work has not already been done. So let's look at the actual estimate. We ended up with an actual cost at the right-of-way phase authorization of almost $110,000 compared to $33,600 from the application estimate. So what happened? Well, if we applied the 40% contingency, we would have inflated the same 12% and got a cost of $47,000 roughly. And you look at the cost to relocate the AEP poles, that was $45,236. So that number was right on. But don't forget there are other utilities that may be located on those poles. It's often not just AEP. You do have other lines, often cable, sometimes telephone, depending on where you are. And you might have other underground utilities located around. So it's recommended to be thorough about what utilities will be affected. So taking a look in hindsight, what unknown risks popped up or reared their ugly head on this project? As noted, this was broken out from phase 1, and phase 1 actually had funds that went back to 2012, I believe, and that meant it actually qualified under the old stormwater regulation, where linear development exemption for stormwater quantity was applied. The long gap between the application in 2016 and when the project would actually occur meant that those original stormwater regulations expired. The exemptions expired in June of 19. That meant that it had to develop stormwater quantity management. It was an unforeseen change. As many know, between about 2015, 2016, and now, FHWA and VDOT have become much more focused on ADA compliance and really meeting those requirements. And so that required some redesign at the crossings to get them fully compliant with our understanding and FHWA's understanding of the ADA regulations. And in 2016, no one foresaw the COVID-19 pandemic with the supply chain disruptions and especially the inflation that we've seen on materials costs. This project was bid this past winter. Can't remember if it was December or January, but we know that prices started going up in spring of 2020, and they've been increasing since. That level of inflation is not something that we would have thought about. We would have considered some inflation at an average pace, but not this level of inflation. And I'll get a little bit into it later. Just a maintenance of traffic, one item in the bid came out at 6 times the application estimate and 3 times the final engineer's estimate, even though that was conservative. I'll get into a little bit of more detail about why that was such a shock a little later. So looking at the application construction estimates, including inflation, it was $1.328 million. By the time 4 years later, we ended up with $1,363,510. This is removing betterment from it there. That's not too far off. That's actually pretty decent estimating. Of course, we always like it to be a little under rather than a little over, but that's not a drastic difference. We had some items increase, as I mentioned, the requirements for the stormwater regulations added the underground stormwater management. The MOT costs, at least for the final estimate, also were increased over the application estimate. And then I mentioned inflation and the business climate added a little bit. And we had some items that decreased because we were a little over. We had to remove some non-essential items due to the funding type. So lighting and street trees got removed, and the county and the consultant did a good job of streamlining some in-plan utility adjustments to just the amount that's needed. So that reduced a little bit from the application estimate as well. So let's take a little look about how that cost estimating workbook, had it been available, could have helped identify some of these points. As we mentioned, you had the suggested contingencies, and we would have identified the need for a contingency greater than 15 to 20% based on that delay in the schedule. So I did 25% here, just as an example. Depending on how far out you are and what the risk is, you may go a little higher, you may go a little lower. There is a engineering judgment based on that. The incidental claims and work orders, remember, this is different than contingency. I had 5 in here. Alex mentioned that 10 is what we're frequently seeing, just because that seems to be more consistent with what's happening in the field. So that would have added another 61,000 to what you see here. And just the increased estimate, because it's a 20% was what the CEI was based on, that increased that number a little bit as well. Make sure we don't forget the VDOT oversight for construction phase. It has those spots in there. So especially if you're considering local administration on a project, you want to make sure those are included. MOT here, just given the scenario, you notice that the contingency is different because we note that's higher risk. Just given the corridor, the location, the proximity to 81, the travel speeds, the restrictions and lane closures. And to the right here, and I don't show it on the screen, but they're the assumptions category. When listing out those assumptions, that may have also resulted in re-examining that base cost of 40,000. I left it in here because I wanted to use the numbers that were the base numbers that were generated in the original estimate and apply them into this workbook. For the PE phase, previously the base cost was based on 10% of the construction estimates. That ended up not being quite enough, and note that there are better approaches. We can look at the project that was finished at phase 1, noting that when you have a new federal project, there's some things that do have to be repeated, and noting how far out the design is, some things potential to pop up, and that's why we actually have a need for a contingency greater than 5 to 7%, which is from the suggested contingencies for PE at this level of development. Remember that's suggested contingencies were if the project were 1 year to advertisement. I showed 10 here. I might even be inclined to do 15 or 20 based on a 5-6 year gap in starting the project. And of course, there was a VDOT oversight, and that should say for PE phase, but it shows for each of the phases. And the right-of-way phase, I included that 40% contingency that's from the suggested amount. It's nice that the estimate workbook reminds us that there are contingencies that should be applied to each area. And the assumptions may have identified that we should evaluate the base costs a little more to determine that other utilities are not applicable or are applicable. And of course, there's the VDOT oversight for right-of-way and utility space. So when we compare the totals, we look at the application estimate of $1,768,000, and we apply the same base numbers for construction and right-of-way and use the same calculation method into the estimate workbook, but adding the contingencies, we've actually increased it to $1.982 million. So we've increased it by $214,084 when we inflate it the same amount to fiscal year 22. So let's look at the totals and see how that came out in the actual contract award. We had an engineer's final estimate of $1,363,510, as we noted earlier. The low bidder came in at $1,566,417. So we've actually got a difference of almost $203,000. But what's interesting is that's all encompassed in one item, and that's maintenance of traffic. The engineer's final estimate was $100,000 for that, and that is actually more than was actually bid for the phase 1 portion of the project, which was 3 times as long. And so you think shorter duration of construction, shorter distance, that actually was the county, the engineer, VDOT, we all thought that was a reasonable conservative estimate. The low bidder came in at $315,000, and the second lowest bidder was actually in the same range. So when you take out that one item and you look at all the other items combined, the low bidder was about $12,000 below the engineer's estimate. That is almost spot on estimating outside of that one item. But we still have to deal with that one item. And so what was the impact of the locality? Well, when you take all the components, PE, right-of-way, and construction, the project had a $377,000 funding shortfall. As we mentioned, we covered 2 of the key items, MOT and utility relocations. And when compared to the application estimate, that was $353,000 of that $377,000. So that's almost the whole thing. The remainder was a combination of those, the bit of inflation, the regulation changes, the additional design. A good portion of the remainder was absorbed by the contingency. It was a good thing they did include higher than 10% contingency that absorbed a lot of that remaining, the remaining changes that popped up. So now the county had to figure out a way to fund that shortfall. Now this project is being smart scale, only a portion of the shortfall was covered. And so this is the impact to the county, is they had to find local funds to cover it. Depending on how sizable that is, some localities might really struggle with that, and other funding types might not have this option. It might be you as a locality would have to find a way to fund it with local funds in entirety for the overage. That can be a big stress for locality budgets. So if the estimate workbook was used with those additional contingencies and several items noted in there that would identify to consider, the county would have started with an additional $214,000 in smart scale funds. Now that's not enough to cover the entire deficit, but it was certainly enough to have that overage funded. And we looked at, I mentioned 3 things. 2 of them were a little digger deep into the MOT number based on the assumptions and the utility relocations. You add those 2 things and the incidentals and work orders, you up that to 10%. That would have actually covered the remaining shortfall, and the project would have been fully funded. And there would have been no need for any local funds, any stress when those bids were opened. So what lessons have we learned from this? It's remember, and it's highlighted in the estimate workbook, that contingency should be applied to all phases, even when your project has started and has been partially developed. And when you have those long gaps, you're going to have higher contingencies likely than the workbook suggestions, because the longer the gap in the schedule, the more risk is likely to pop up. You never know what market conditions are going to change. The further out you are, the more variable it's likely to be. And then design standards and regulations are updating and changing. So you don't know what you'll have to go back and add or modify. Always do a thorough investigation for on-site utilities to see that you really are accounting for all of them there. You notice on most utility poles, there's more than one utility. I look outside my house and I got one stretch has 3, another stretch has 2, another stretch has 1. It's a maze of them, and you get into more urban areas and it's even a bigger maze. And be cautious on the high dollar lump sum items, especially maintenance of traffic. And if you're in a complex situation, you're probably looking at higher contingency than average, than even the suggested contingencies in the workbook. You want to consider more conservative base costs. This isn't the only project where that has become a shock. And so just remember that the more time you spend developing the estimate, I know that this is a lot more work up front, but that's a much less of a headache when the bids are open, because just 1 or 2 missed items, or even one that's just a shocker that no one would have seen, like the MOT on this project, can skew what is an otherwise great estimate. And so we're emphasizing the estimate workbook because that can help mitigate that risk. Does anyone have any questions?
Sorry,
Am I still on?
I was on mute, and I was asking or addressing a question that was asked. We do have a question. It's from Mr. Wilcox. The question is, did you address good sources for unit cost? Understood that unit costs vary with locality, quantity, etc. Just looking for some initial figures. You want to address that initially, and I may follow up with my answer as well.
Yeah, I didn't delve as deeply into the unit costs at the time. We didn't have the Stanton bid tool, but the VDOT bid tabulations were available, and looking at those and the locations and the quantities to make sure they were not using the low bid, but we're using a more representative figure of an average. That's what was done at the time. Obviously, at this time, we have the Stanton bid tool, and we have those calculation methods that help us more with the unit costs. And Alex, I'll let you continue with any additional thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, I was going to respond in a very similar fashion. I mean, we do have bid tabs that we maintain, and we certainly can provide those to others. And I'm pretty sure they're accessible through our webpage. As Adam mentioned, we certainly need to consider the quantities that the question addresses as well. When we have a greater quantity and we have examples of using lower quantities, we would expect a lower price, and vice versa if it's just the opposite. But past projects has been our go-to, to give an initial bid price for those types of quantities, or for our quantities. And part of our contingencies are used for that purpose as well. I'll tell you what, Mr. Wilcox, let me find that link, and I'll certainly provide it. It will probably be through our text window. So let me do that while our next presenter presents his example, and I'll get that out to everyone. One thing that Adam had mentioned, the impacts that need to be considered once the job goes to advertisement. The contingencies chart doesn't stop at PAC. It continues on and gives some contingencies when we're advertising our projects, and that's because our bidding climate is always changing. The number of how hungry contractors are is a direct relation to what type of work's out there, but also probably more importantly the volume of work that's out there. and, you know, just the number of products that are on the street. And certainly the COVID issue has certainly, I think, affected our prices as well. So we're carrying those contingencies throughout advertisement to help mitigate those risks of, you know, issues that we see with the bidding climate. And another thing that I want to say before Craig starts is there was some discussions about C&I costs and using the percentages for those. You know, we truly expect C&I to be calculated, you know, based on the level of effort to administer the project, but also the durations of the project. You know, we see C&I costs around the 20% range, but we do not want to be taking percentages straight from the bid cost or bid items to calculate that price. We really want to see how that C&I estimate was developed. Okay, so Adam, thanks a lot. I think you brought out some great points in your presentation. Again, this project that Adam presented was developed prior to our estimate workbook and the use of contingencies as we're using them moving forward. We have Craig Moore on the call. He's going to be presenting our last example. Craig's one of our assistants in L&D as well, mainly working on some of our 81 work, but certainly is used for his abilities to help develop estimates and review applications. So Craig, with that, take it away. Thanks.
All righty. Thank you very much, Alex. Appreciate it, and appreciate everyone staying tuned in this morning. At least the count seems to be stable. I'm not sure whether people are still there listening to me or not, but again, do appreciate it. And as we get through this, one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about a Route 220 Super Streets project, not going into great level of detail about developing the estimate aspects of it, but some of the considerations that we need to be taking as we work through a project. So I wanted to go through the project overview and then some refinements, really estimate considerations, and then just summarize that and take questions here at the end. And looking at the time, I think it's around about 11:15. I believe Alex said I had 90 minutes for my presentation. So hopefully everybody brought their lunch. No, just joking there. So we worked through this. Yeah. But our project limit's running, it's about 0.8 of a mile, looking to improve safety and reduce congestion through a super street concept. And so with that, we're looking to have some restricted crossing U-turns. That's R cuts, 6 of those, and then 2 traffic signals. So that's really our overview of our project that we're dealing with here, and that we're trying to implement and come up with a cost estimate, or trying to refine and come up with a cost estimate. So I wanted to walk you through some of the considerations of that. So here with our examples, our initial sketch, our idea, we have 6 different median crossovers. Some preliminary look was laid out, and you know, it looks fairly straightforward. We should be able to calculate the amount of pavement, you know, a little bit of landscaping, a little bit of demolition.
Greg,
you know, we know we're going to put.
Greg,
Yeah.
let me interrupt real quick. Do you have a presentation? I don't think you're presenting.
Yes. Is it not showing? It should.
It took me a minute to realize that, if that tells you anything, but no, seriously. There you go. There you go.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
You're not sure. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Sorry about that, but very good. So let me back up here. So here are our project limits running through there. This is our initial sketch and idea, and so you know, it looks fairly simple, straightforward. Reworking the existing median crossovers, doing a little bit of demolition work. You know, from all that, it should be fairly straightforward to calculate what the cost would be. We've come up with some areas. We know we're going to install 2 signal all systems there at 2 intersections to work through this. So looking at it from that level, you know, it seems pretty straightforward. Sort of focus in. We look here. We've got a existing crossover we're going to rework. There looks to be appears to be a cemetery across from it. Move on up a little bit further. We're going to rework these. Have a street coming out, another street connection coming from the bottom of my screen into it, and then one coming from the top. And then we have a school system here where we're looking to do some signalization as well. So again, seems to be fairly straightforward. Also on the other end, providing another restricted movement with a signal, making it a left only in terms of coming through the median crossover. The signal actual movement allows right and left turns, but no into movements from northbound 220. And as we continue on along, there's a little bit more work in the median of improving the the flow through this corridor, wanting to preserve the arterial movement through here. So part of the things in reducing congestion. So again, looking at this, again, fairly straightforward type project. Well, let me just give a little example, people, of slope here. So had a tree ended up having a hollow point in it, ended up putting a chain around it to keep the tree from splitting. Initially hadn't thought that there would be that potential to need to do that. So as you work through your project, one of the things, risk may change, and how you mitigate those risks may change. So you need to keep that in mind even at this early stage. And here's another little, hopefully this video is showing here. Working through, had plans on where the tree was going to fall. Think things are going to go well. And fortunately, it was my wife's camera. Didn't go quite as planned. So again, you never really know. Murphy's Law was out there, as Kelly had mentioned earlier, and how that plays through our process and how we deal with that. So again, we want to try and plan for those unknowns as we work through our cost estimate and try and understand those things. And sometimes we don't know what they are, but we need to try and be proactive in thinking out how those things may impact us. Here's this intersection, or this U-turn crossover at the beginning of the project. Mentioned there was a cemetery there. One of the things that also, what the final sketch ended up at, on which the estimate was based on, is a much wider median crossover. And one of the things that needed to be asked here is who all is going to use this crossover? Was it wider or made wider to accommodate the traffic in and out of this cemetery? No, there were other outlying issues up and down this corridor dealing with tractor and trailers trying to use the median crossovers and getting stuck. So one of the things that, again, making sure that you have an understanding of what you're trying to do, and then the implications that if we are restricting this crossover, right now trucks can somewhat use it. Sometimes they get stuck, sometimes they rut it up. But if we put this red island, what I have shown in red there, that island in there, that's going to really restrict them. And then where is that going to first force the tractor and trailers? So again, taking that into consideration. Also, another thing, when we do that and rework this, going out, doing a visual walkthrough of the site, to some rock outcropping, so your earthwork, your excavation is going to be potentially higher because of that, even though we don't have any geotechnical investigation out there. Also, along the top of my screen there, coming through that median crossover, you can see a little bit of a plan for pavement improvement on the shoulder, again, knowing that tractor and trailers are going to use this crossover. As we continue on along working through this, again, on the left, very simple, straightforward sketch, should be able to easy to implement and estimate. You look at the sketch on the right, all of a sudden now we've got drainage considerations and where the drainage, how we're going to work with putting those drop inlets in there, curb inlets, whatever it may be. One of the things the presenters had mentioned earlier was temporary construction easements. And here we're showing a fairly large temporary construction easement because we don't really know how this is going to work out yet. We conceptually know we're going to have to deal with stormwater drainage on near this business here. We hope we wouldn't get into really tearing up their parking lot, but there's a good chance you may have excavating equipment that is crossing through there to install whatever type of inlet feature would be needed for the storm drainage system. On the far right side, I don't have any storm drainage over there, but I am showing a proposed temporary construction easement on this side here. And reason, when you look at this, well, why would that be? Well, again, what are we trying to have make this U-turn movement? Do we want buses turning through there? Do we want tractor trailers, fire trucks? What are we anticipating, or should we be anticipating and designing for using this median crossover? So one of the things here with this, again, sort of zooming into it a little bit more, looking at it, had talked about the stormwater drainage issues, but then as we look at this other proposed temporary construction easement, I do not have any storm drainage items here. And if we look at that, if I have a school bus coming through that area, they cannot adequately make that turning movement without doing some improvements on the shoulder. And in doing that, we're most likely going to be potentially exceeding our right-of-way. So including that temporary construction easement, because again, that's a risk that until we have an actual detailed survey, we don't know to what level we would be impacting that property. So we need to show that temporary construction easement. Same as we were doing for our stormwater drainage over here and being able to have the equipment access the site, we're also needing to do it over here because we may need to do some shoulder improvements to be able to adequately accommodate a school bus turning there. As we continue on north, moving from that southern end where the cemetery is, moving towards the high school, again, another restricted median here in terms of how this traffic is working. Again, look fairly straightforward. We're moving a little bit of existing curbing, putting down some asphalt, doing a little bit of landscaping or what have you there. Actually, this one is not as significant impact, hoping to reuse much of the storm drain that is already there, but still having some storm drainage impact. Also needing to make the median crossover a little bit wider because we would, if you had a fire truck coming out of there or an ambulance, turning into there, what vehicles are we trying to accommodate getting under Tinker Mill Road? So again, making sure that we're adequately considering those, and if we need to make any adjustments in terms of outside of our right-of-way or our existing pavement that's out there today. Continuing on north, looking to put a signal hit in there. So again, fairly straightforward, doing a little bit of work here with our movements into the high school. Most likely you would anticipate school buses going in there. But also another consideration is how do they get their supplies for their meal preps and things of that sort? Is that by tractor and trailer as well? What other considerations? And those are things that can all of a sudden cause your estimate to explode. So, and working through this, as you can see, this actual median crossover in terms of what we're anticipating the work to be is not significantly different, but it certainly has cost implications. And also another thing here considering is a drainage pipe that needs to be dealt with and installing or having a temporary construction easement to be able to work outside of the right-of-way, give adequate room to deal with the storm drainage issues. And as we continue on through, heading north on the other end of the school entrance there, have another signal that's going in, and working with that should be fairly straightforward. So working through that aspect there, one of the things though that we did realize is we have this business on the opposite of that. We really need to have a channelizing island there because they will no longer be able to go straight across, and we wouldn't want those business visitors to think that they could do that. So actually constructing a channelizing island across the street as well as a proposed temporary construction easement would be needed to do that level of work there. And then we're also showing the type of demolition that needs to be happening. Another thing on this project here, there's a water line that's running through where the signal heads are going. So making sure that we're adequately considering whether we would have to relocate that water line or will we have to relocate the footer for the signal and how that would potentially impact right away. The county, the school system over here, basically we would need to acquire some right of way in terms of for our signal post and being able to have our cabinet there. So again, showing that information. Another component here in terms of our storm drainage system here, we know that, we understand that, but also making sure that, you know, where is this stormwater going? Do we have an adequate easement for that, and how we're accounting for those things? And part of that gets into here, proposed temporary construction easement along this area in terms of that we may potentially need to bring stormwater management, the storm drainage system through here. We have this DI at this area here to the right of that business. How are we accessing in there, getting to that and working with that? Again, that's part of the reasons that proposed temporary construction easement is as it is, so that we can best address the stormwater management. Also on the north side, you see another temporary construction easement associated with stormwater drainage. So again, this is schematically laid out as to how this would work. You know, some idea of the pipe sizes here, but again, maybe you wouldn't get to that level of detail, but you do know that stormwater in most situations, unless you're on the eastern shore where maybe you've got lift stations or something like that, is going to flow downhill, and you already have some topography, maybe you have LiDAR information or using the information from Google Earth to try and help estimate where that stormwater drainage is going to be going and how you would end up managing and handling that stormwater drainage. So again, one of the things from those initial sketches that was not shown, maybe it was thought about, maybe it wasn't thought about, is how we're going to construct the stormwater management system. The focus from these sketches was on the roadway improvements necessary to implement the R cuts. However, there are several aspects that go along with that. And again, just as I had shown there with the tree cutting, things don't always go as planned. So even if we refine our sketch and have more information on which to base our estimate, we still need to have a level of contingency, because as we look at this today, again, this is a smart scale application, there are certainly unknowns that we don't know about that we're going to encounter. And again, the only way that we can deal with that, other than having more information, is to put a contingency in there on this project. Again, one of the things that was talking about was the rock excavation early on. Another consideration through here would be our existing pavement structure, getting additional geotechnical borings and asphalt pourings out there to better understand our pavement structure today and how much of that would actually need to be rebuilt. So again, we don't actually know that. So again, we account for that somewhat through our contingencies in dealing with our estimate. So as we work through our estimate, one of the things here with that, using our estimating workbook, and let me pull up another detailed estimate here. So this is using the Stanton spreadsheet. And so trying to assume some quantities of excavation, you know, we, through Google Earth, VGen data out there, may be able to come up with some contours, do some site visiting, you know, estimating there. We have what our rock excavation may be. Again, at this stage, these are preliminary numbers based on the information we have available, which in many cases is not a lot of information. We do have the historical plans that provides a little bit of insight to what's out there today in terms of existing drainage structures and how the current road is constructed, but it doesn't necessarily give us any information if things have changed out there. Another consideration that I wanted to point out was jacked and bored. You know, are we going to be able to open cut Route 220 and shut down traffic out there? No, not going to happen. So we need to plan on doing some jacking and boring out there for our storm drainage system. Again, you know, we don't necessarily know will we have to do that for every pipe, but we do know we're going to have storm drainage, and planning for that in our cost estimate, I think, is very prudent on our part, so that we don't end up at the end with a shortfall, either when it goes to advertisement and we get bids in, or end up with a change order or some differing condition clause and ultimately a work order. So trying to best account for those through our estimate up front when we're applying for this funding. So again, our estimate here based on what we can extract from the sketches that we have today. So there are assumptions that go into this, and that's one of the reasons it's good to have experienced people working through developing your estimate, working with folks that can think sort of outside the box or really, and this is sort of a weird statement, but understand what they don't know and how they're going to account for that. And again, that's what is tried to be done here through development of this, as well as with our contingencies. Also, Alex Price had pointed out in developing the different estimates, we have to get that over to our workbook. So one of the things the estimators did in developing this estimate was assign a category to the different items that they had, such that when they were pulling this together, they could actually use this to populate the workbook more easily, and that's what we have up here. So this information here is what was then copied over to the workbook, and then from there our contingencies applied to it. So if we go to our workbook, and here with this, our contingencies vary here on this project, and you may ask, well, why are the contingencies varying? Again, that's because of the level of certainty and risk associated with a given item. For mobilization and construction survey, we felt we had a reasonably good understanding and handling of that, so we had applied a 30% contingency. Maintenance of traffic had items in our estimate in which we were we had worked on developing a maintenance of traffic cost estimate, but still realizing that there's a lot of uncertainty associated with that. This is an arterial out there, Route 220, a lot of traffic, the potential to have multiple setups, takedowns, and how this would end up being phased. We have a 40% contingency on our maintenance of traffic. Roadway out there, we're not building a new alignment. We're not shifting the alignment that's out there. We're not really adjusting the cross slope or the super elevations of what's out there. The roadway is fairly set, but there are still some uncertainties associated with that, such as the shoulders and how much of the rework has to be done with the median crossovers. So we set that at 30%. Now, hydraulics, again, we did have some schematics laid out of what we thought we were going to deal with stormwater. One would maybe think, well, maybe we've eliminated some of the risk with the hydraulics aspect of it there and our drainage. However, we haven't done channel adequacy calculations, and so we need to have a little bit of coverage in addition to that 30% for those other unknowns, and that's the reason our hydraulics here is set at 40%. In-plan utilities, using GIS on which to extract our utility locations, again, primarily that water line and how that would be dealt with. There's certainly uncertainty associated with the information in the GIS in terms of where its location is. So for in-plan utilities, we felt it appropriate to put a 60% contingency on those items as we work through our cost estimate. Traffic, more of your permanent items and your signals. Again, we do show what we're doing there with what will ultimately be our pavement markings and our signal locations. However, there is some considerations as to how that's going to get put in place, so felt it appropriate to have a 40% contingency there. Our structure and bridge, not applicable to this project. Earthwork and geotech had a 40% contingency added onto those cost items that I was showing you from the other estimate. Again, felt that there's certainly uncertainty in those items. Environmental may have some jurisdictional streams or wetlands to deal with, depending on, in terms of our outfall and how our channel adequacy plays out. But even with that, felt that there's still uncertainty associated with that, so have a 40% contingency on our environmental. So that ends up giving us basically a overall average 36.4% contingency and puts us at about $6.9 million. And one of the things in going through that aspect there is, we did come up with a more refined sketch than that earlier sketch. Let's say we did not go through that extra effort to work through better defining those risks and understanding the project, took that, initial thing. And again, this is just sort of a quick way of looking at it, but basically taking the same price. We may have had different base prices, but applying a 75% contingency, which is what Alex was showing in his earlier presentation coming out of the estimating manual. Now we're up around about $8.8 million in terms of our estimate. So again, better understanding our project can help people better understand how they need to be estimating the project, and then ultimately what gets constructed and how that is perceived by the contracting industry, as well as, probably more importantly, what were the expectations of the citizens early on, and then what are they ending up with when the project is completed. So there are numerous impacts to how our estimating affects the project early on, what we're having to work through and design, what is allowed during our construction, and then also helping to ensure that we are meeting the public's expectation, the client's expectation of this project when it is actually constructed, from when it was initially presented. So again, our costs can explode if we're not thinking about those risks and accounting for those risks as we work through our project estimating early on and throughout really the life of the project. So with that, again, don't want to go on too long here, but we'll stop and see if you have any questions.
Craig, there is one question that's on the screen. It really, I'm not sure if it gets to your example, but the question deals with, I think I understand, and Joe, if I have it wrong, let me know. But if someone is developing a project and buying right away themselves, and they're only going to be requesting funds to construct a project, how do they handle that using the workbook? And if you're only requesting funds for construction, that's all we need to see. And I think through the portal, we'll have to work with you to give you guidance there through our programming and planning office. But we just need to see what's really only being applied for. If it's construction funds, we just need to see the construction estimate.
And even I can add, Alex, in the workbook, they could put that under the assumptions in the PE and the right of way that these things are being done by the locality with locality funds prior to the project funding. Yes,
definitely so. Definitely so. And Wayne, I see that you maybe looked at the links I provided. You're welcome, Joey. I want to present my screen. And I'm going to just bring over the links that we use to go to bid results and bid tabs. You really probably need to know more about what is being advertised out there, and certainly we can help you find products that may be more representative of the jobs that you're estimating. But this takes us back to what I had shown previously. This is the VDOT or VirginiaDOT.org webpage, Business Center. If you'll scroll down to our construction division, there's a couple headings up here. You've got bid tabs and you've got bid lettings. If you go to bid tabs, again, you need to know what you're looking at, and we can help you with that. But you need to know when a job was advertised and when the job bid tabs were available. So, for instance, if we look at bid tabs for the May 26, 2021 letting, this project, there's multiple, as you can see, there's a lot of information here, 205 pages. So what this has is every job that was let on that date, it's got the bid tabs. And in some cases, there are more than one or there's more than 3 contractors that bid on a job, and you'll see at the end of say, if this had 5 contractors bidding on the job, this next sheet would be the second and third contractor that bid on the job. So again, you need to know a little bit more information about what you're looking for, but this is where you would find that. And again, if we can help you with that, we can help locate bid tabs for jobs that are, you know, representative of what you're wanting to estimate. Here's a bid letting tab as well. Provides information about, you know, who the jobs were awarded to. It's a little, you know, it lags behind a little bit depending on when the bid date was or letting date, and then, you know, when we look at the bids to see if they're acceptable and then decide to award. But, you know, here's basically a sheet or a file that shows all the different products that we're awarding and the lowest bids. And this is kind of new to me. Seeing estimated construction costs and an engineer's estimate range. So this could be useful as well, but I did want to highlight where these tabs are in the links that you can use. So JP asked thoughts on the statewide and district-wide running averages as cross-references resources. JP, I mean, I certainly we'll definitely see different prices around the state, depending on there's a number of contractors out in Northern Virginia. There's a lot of work up there. There's not as many contractors sometimes bidding on our jobs. So you'll see a difference in the prices that, you know, it might be more competitive up in other areas across the state with more competition. But you know, certainly if you're advertising jobs in our district, you certainly need to see or be looking at jobs that are in our district. JP, if you want to expand any more there, please let me know. But I hope I've given some insight on my thoughts with the statewide versus district-wide averages.
We're on the same page with the spreadsheets and where we sit. There may be other localities that
yes
are sitting geographically between 2 districts, so we can pull up the Lynchburg and the Salem district spreadsheets just as a litmus test on projects we're estimating. It's
definitely
nothing. Everything's taken with a grain of salt. Nothing's the gospel, but it's good to have those resources. That's kind of how I look at them.
Definitely so. Certainly in the areas where you are with the Bedford County and as bordering the Lynchburg district, certainly I would use Salem, but also the Lynchburg district bid tabs and prices. All right. Any other questions out there from our group? We maintained about 88 to 90% people on the call throughout the morning. So I'm hoping it was insightful. Joey's raised his hands. Joey, feel free to ask your question. Joey, go ahead and unmute yourself. I see your question.
No problem. For the actual full submittal application, do we just upload that through the smart portal like we did all the preliminary information?
Yes.
Or is there another door we go through?
No, you would upload all this information up to the portal. You know, and we talk about sketch project estimates and the workbook.
Nope.
If there are other information that we spoke of today, you know, developing the scope of work, helping us understand your estimate and assumptions. We talked about auto turn type templates. All that stuff is good information for you to go ahead and upload on the portal. So that would be the location to do that. John, I haven't personally used BidX in too much detail. I've certainly relied on the expertise of the folks that you've heard on the call discuss our examples this morning. But that is something that I think is being used. John, feel free to unmute yourself and kind of help us explain BidX, and if you guys are using it.
Yeah, we do use it. It basically tracks. It's a proprietary software that you have to have a subscription to.
Yep.
But I think most folks do because it's used for bidding and proposals and so forth. But it helps you. You can go in and put in a item code number or an item description. You can sort it by locality. You can sort it by quantity. So it kind of helps you narrow down sometimes what bid prices are currently running. And it also gives you the range. It tells you how many bids there were, gives you the high and the low and the average. So it also helps you see, if there were maybe just one or two bidders, then prices didn't vary too much. It doesn't always help you understand, or very rarely helps you understand why specific contractors may have bid what they did on a specific item. So it is a relatively easy way to check bid prices for localities. You can sort by county and also by quantity.
Thank you, John. That certainly sounds like it would be a useful tool for our localities as well as us inside VDOT and our consultants. So thank you for mentioning that. I mentioned the cost estimating office continuing to develop and modify the cost estimating manual and looking at opportunities to help us with new tools or modifying tools that we're currently using today. I hope there's
Alex, you just got muted mid-sentence.
Yeah, sorry. I'm not sure where I got muted, but John, thanks for bringing that up. I think I was just trying to explain or just discussing the continued efforts of our cost estimating office to keep updating our tools, updating our manuals, providing training. So look for that type of look for the training that should be coming out, or discussed through the end of the year and coming out the first of the year. We have some other questions or comments. We make the presentation slides and recording available for future reference. Certainly will. And I know we have recorded the presentation. As soon as we download it, we'll certainly send out an email link to everyone on the call. We do have a list of everyone, and I'll go back and use the email addresses that were initially on the invite. So if there are some that are taking part and aren't initially on that invite, folks may need to forward the recording to them. Yeah, I see Mr. Gaudin's making an effort to look for someone that might be interested in position. Certainly, I will say we're looking for 4 here in L&D, so in our own district. So we are certainly lacking engineers throughout this part of the region, and maybe it's just because of the climate and COVID, but I don't know. But certainly, if you're interested in a position in the city of Martinsville, please look out for that ad. Anything else anybody wants to add or have questions about? We're going to conclude this presentation here pretty soon. Would not have guessed it would have ran up to 12 o'clock as we had scheduled, but I do think it's been very good information to discuss, and I hope you found it helpful and informative. I certainly appreciate all of our consultants being out there who were able to participate, who routinely help us and help our localities. And certainly, you know, the localities that are out there, we all want to be successful. We all want to succeed, and we all want to support each other. And looking at these opportunities where we've learned lessons, you know, both through the products that we have developed and some of the products that y'all have developed, you know, we're in this together, and we're all going to be successful. And I just do appreciate your participation. And as Anthony mentioned earlier, we are coming up on the time period for the portal to be open for revenue sharing and TAP applications. So if you have questions about your applications based on today's presentation, or maybe our preliminary comments on your applications, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to support you and answer your questions. Thank you, Randy, and thanks to everyone else. We're going to conclude our presentation. Look for an email with the link to the recording, and I hope to have an opportunity to meet you all in the future. I know there are some names out there that I do know, some that I do not, but thank you again for participating, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thanks, Alex.